Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into the fascinating and honestly mind-boggling demographic landscape of India. We're looking at the sheer scale of the people who make up one of the most dynamic nations on Earth. So let's just get right into it.
To kick things off, let's ask a fundamental question. When you think of India, how do you actually perceive it? Is it just a specific territory drawn on a map? Or is it, at its core, the amalgam of its people? Because to truly understand any nation, we have to look closely at the human beings living within those borders.
Grounding ourselves in the 2011 census data, we are looking at a nation of 1,210,000,000 people. That is 1.21 billion individuals. Take a second to really wrap your head around that number. It officially cements the country as the second most populous in the entire world. And to put that absolute massive scale into perspective, that population is actually larger than the total populations of North America, South America, and Australia completely combined. Literally 3 entire continents worth of human beings residing in a single nation. As you can imagine, this immense scale puts intense pressure on limited resources and creates some absolutely incredible socioeconomic dynamics. Now, to make sense of numbers this huge, we're going to break this explainer down into 4 logical pillars: distribution, density, growth, and demographic composition. Let's move right along. Starting with pillar number 1, spatial distribution. Where do all these people actually live? Well, if you look at how the population is spread out, with one dot representing 200,000 people, the pattern is highly uneven. You've got these incredibly dense, dark clusters of people in certain areas, while other massive regions are practically blank. The stark contrast here is pretty incredible. You have densely packed states like Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Bihar, and West Bengal holding massive chunks of the population. But then, on the flip side, you have vast mountainous states like Arunachal Pradesh, Jammu and Kashmir, and Uttarakhand that account for a tiny fraction of the national total. So why is it so uneven? Well, it's definitely not random. Physical realities like climate, terrain, and water availability dictate where agriculture thrives. Then you add in socioeconomic factors like irrigation networks and rich mineral deposits, plus historical patterns of settlement, transport, and the massive, undeniable pull of urbanization, drawing millions to industrial hubs and major cities. It's a complex mix that explains exactly why people settle where they do. All right, that brings us to our second pillar, density. It's one thing to know how many people there are, but how tightly packed are they? The big defining number from the 2011 data is 382. That's 382 persons per square kilometer. To give you some context on how fast things are changing, that's an increase of over 200 people per square kilometer since just 1951. It is a massive compression of humanity in roughly half a century. But national averages always hide the real extremes, right? Just imagine the vast open spaces of Arunachal Pradesh, where there's only 17 persons per square kilometer. Now contrast that with the national capital territory of Delhi, cramming a staggering 11,297 people into that exact same amount of space. The spatial variation is simply mind-blowing. Now, geographers know that just dividing people by total land doesn't tell the whole story, especially in a heavily agrarian society, so they use something called physiological density. This means taking the total population and dividing it only by the net cultivated area. This gives us a much truer picture of the heavy burden placed on the actual land that feeds the nation. Okay, shifting our focus to time, let's look at our third pillar, growth. What were the phases of change that brought the population to this immense size? The census data lays out 4 distinct historical phases over the last century. We start with phase 1, pre-1921, which was relatively stagnant. Then phase 2 saw a steady increase up to 1951. This was followed by phase 3, a massive explosion in growth from 1951 to 1981. And finally phase 4, the post-1981 period up to the present day, where growth is still very high but has thankfully started to slow down, largely thanks to later marriage ages and better female education. A really fascinating metric to grasp the momentum of all this is population doubling time. Basically, it's how long it takes for a population to completely double at its current annual growth rate. Even at what sounds like a small 1.64% annual growth rate, the math means millions of new citizens are added every single year. Which leads to a critical projection. Even with a slowing growth rate, the sheer momentum is kind of unstoppable. The World Development Report actually projected the population will hit 1,350 million, or 1.35 billion, by 2025. The absolute numbers are just going to keep climbing. Finally, let's dive into our fourth and final pillar, composition. Beyond the raw numbers and the density metrics, who actually are the people making up India today? A deeply defining characteristic of the society is its profound rural foundation. A massive 68.8% of the population lives in rural areas, spread across more than 600,000 different villages. So while the rapid urbanization gets all the major headlines, the statistical soul of the country is still distinctly rural. But perhaps the absolute most dynamic element of this demographic composition is the youth bulge. Adolescents, meaning those between 10 and 19 years old, make up a staggering 20.9% of the entire country. This youthful energy is a real game changer. It holds immense potential to drive the country forward into the next century. Taking a closer look at this youthful demographic, we see a nearly even split: 52.7% male and 47.3% female. Understanding this breakdown is absolutely crucial because it sets the stage for the specific policies needed to support this massive incoming generation of adults.
However, it is not all smooth sailing. While this youth group holds incredible potential, the source text highlights that they are deeply vulnerable. Without the right guidance, this massive youth population faces serious hurdles like lower marriage ages, high rates of female illiteracy, huge school dropout numbers, low nutrient intake, and even drug abuse. If this potential isn't channeled properly, these vulnerabilities could easily turn into national crises.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound final thought for today's explainer. When you consider the sheer scale of its uneven distribution, the immense density pressing on its resources, and this massive vulnerable youth population, how exactly will this demographic giant shape its own future? The data shows us exactly where things stand today, but it's this upcoming generation that's really going to decide its tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack these insights. Keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.